Hi, welcome to Sewing with Sandy. I just finished Simplicity 3142. I made this skirt, Skort. It's great, I love it. I made it out of a stretch crepe. It's got a really great fit. Made a couple of changes, and there are a couple of things that I think I would do next time to improve the tailoring of the pattern. But in general, it's pretty good. I used stretch crepe that I have had in my stash, and I love the way it looks, especially with the long boyfriend jacket. It's shown here with a cord boyfriend jacket. I used a black one, and I think it would be perfect for the holidays. It's a great holiday look, and it's short, so it's super comfy, but it looks like a skirt from the front. The crepe makes it a little dressy. I think you can go all kinds of different ways with this. And I actually have a vest pattern that I think I'm going to make with this red crepe. So I'll have a cord looking suit with something like this black sweater underneath it. And it will also be transitional because it's lightweight. But here it is in tights and with the boyfriend jacket. And I just love this look. So let's start sewing. All right, we're gonna get started on our skirt, and we're going to do a couple of things to just get us up and running. We need to interface the back facing, so we're gonna take care of that. And then on pieces 10 and 12, we're going to stay stitch this top edge because we don't want it to stretch out of shape before we take care of the waistband. So stay stitching is just running a bead of stitching inside the seam allowance. So this has a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So we'll run a row of stitching about 3/8 of an inch so you don't have to pull it out after you've actually sewn the piece together. So we're gonna get started with that. All right, this is piece 12. This is our back, and I stay stitched the edge. I just use the edge of my presser foot as a guide. And that keeps it from stretching. I have crepe. It has a little bit of stretch to it. It is very bouncy, so having this on here is actually a good thing. It keeps it from stretching out before I get the front and the waistband on. Now I want to do my darts, and I will show you how I mark my darts. On these, my pieces are right sides together. So on the back, wrong sides, I'm going to put a pin. I'm going to find my size that I cut, and I'm going to put a pin in each edge of that dart in the circle, and then also in the full dart circle down there. So that's where my dart's gonna go. And then what I wanna do is I wanna remove the tissue, so I'm going to transfer where that pin is to the fabric. So I'm gonna put a pin in the fabric and then take this pin out. I'm gonna do the same with these two here. I'm going to replace the pin so I can remove the tissue. So now I have the dart, these 3 dart marks on this side, and I want to do them on the other side because I want to mark both pieces, the left and the right. Make sure these are even. And I'm going to put a pin in the same place where these pins are coming out. So you can see now I have a pin coming in from each side. And when I separate this, my darts are marked on this side of the fabric. So at this point, it's very simple. I just fold at the bottom pin, and then I bring these 2 pins where they're inserted into the fabric together. And I have my dart. Now, like I said, this is super bouncy. So you could press this at this point if it's easier for you to sew and you want to start down here at the tip. So really, really, really skinny and then sew all the way up to the start. And that's super simple, a super simple way to do your darts. So after we've put our darts together, we want to sew this inner leg seam. So I'm going to take both back pieces and I'm going to open them so they're right sides facing up, because we're going to sew a front to the back. So this is piece 12, then I'm going to take piece 10, which is the front, and I'm going to sew this right sides together. So I'm going to put these right sides together and sew this inner leg seam. I sewed the dart into the back and pressed it towards the center back seam, and then sewed my inner leg seam. So I have a back and a front sewn together, and I did that for both sides. So now we're gonna line them up, and this fabric is bouncy, so pressing it is a little bit of a challenge. But you do wanna press one of these inner leg seams to the left and one to the right, or one towards the front and one towards the back. And this is kind of where you wanna start. You want this seam to butt up beautifully. So we're going to start with that. And you cut these pieces together, so they should fit with no problem. And then pin this upper edge. Pin all the way around, and then the same thing with the back. I'm going to pin this edge. And pin all the way around, and we're gonna stitch this big U. So if you're nervous about stitching it and you want to start here, you can start here and sew up and then come back and start here and sew up, or you can sew all the way around. Sew a second seam inside your first seam, and that will help protect the seam in case you pop a stitch and the whole thing won't unravel. Or if you're going to use your overlocker, you can certainly overlock the seam, but definitely 2 rows of stitching, particularly from here to here, is really important. All right, all stitched up. My seams match really great here, right here at this juncture. And I did a row of stitching, and then I did a row of step stitching, which the stitch machine goes zig, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, all the way around the zigzag. That way, if I have to clip it, it gives me a little extra protection, and you can see that this is a little stretchy. So we're gonna set this aside now. We're gonna work on this flap. This is piece 11, which is the front of our skort. And you need to cut one piece of the fashion fabric and one piece of the lining. I cut them both out of the fashion fabric, which is optional, or you could use a fun lining, but this way, if it opens up, it will all look the same. And we're going to sew this seam and this seam. So if you look here at the drawing, you can see that we're going to sew, and of course they have it backwards. You're gonna sew this line, this short seam here, and then this long seam across the bottom here. So we're gonna go ahead and stitch those right sides together. All right, I've stitched these lower edges together. One of the things that the direction tells you to do is to pivot when you get to this corner down here. Do not do that. Stitch off and get back and stitch on. Because when you pivot, you're never always 100% sure if your top thread's gonna connect with your bobbin thread, and then you could get a skip stitch, and then you won't get a beautiful corner. So that's a problem. You're gonna press it, trim your seam down, and then before you turn it inside right, you want to stitch the edge. So you want to make sure that these are wide open, pressed open, and then stitch the lining and the seam allowance together, right? The facing and the seam allowance. And then we can turn this inside right and press it again. And again, like I said, this fabric is very bouncy, so I may have to top stitch this, and that is perfectly okay. I'll have to see how it looks once I finish pressing it. But the other thing I want to do is, now that I have this panel, I want to baste the side seams together and the top seam together, the waistband seam, because I want to make this one unit, right? So just inside the seam allowance, I'm just going to baste these raw edges together, wrong sides together within the seam allowance, so I'm not futzing with a whole bunch of pieces of fabric when I go ahead and sew this to my skirt. And I'm gonna do it all the way around. So I'm gonna do it on this side seam. This is a side seam. This is also a side seam. And then this is the waist seam that goes up around the top. Okay. So here is my skort front, like this. And it actually pressed pretty good. I used a press cloth and I pinned it right into my board, and I'm happy with the way it pressed. And then I sewed the pieces wrong sides together along the waistband and each of the sides. And now I'm going to sew it to the shorts. Before I do that, I did hold it up in the mirror, and I cut the long version, and it's way too long. So the shorts are gonna be way too long. They go to my knee, which is way too long. So what I'm going to do is shorten everything for me by 3 inches at the waistband. So I'm just gonna take this in 3 inches, and I'm going to take the shorts up 3 inches because now is the time to do it. There's an 1.5 inch hem on the shorts, so take that into consideration while you are kind of holding them up against you or pin basting them on to make sure that the length is right. Because once you sew this on, that's the length of this, and you want to make sure that that's correct. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. But the next step is to sew this to the front of the shorts, and this is where you have to kind of trust the process. So I have my shorts here, and I want to open them up and fold them so they're like shorts, right? So here's the front. The back has darts, so we know that. But another way of telling what is the front and the back is always longer, so you can look at the crotch because the back will run over into the front when you match up the waistband. So this is the way my shorts are going to look. This is my waistband for the front, all right? So I'm going to lay that out. I'm gonna flip it around just so it's easier for you. So here's my front, here's my waistband. It's wrong side up. And I'm going to sew my skirt panel right side of my skirt panel to the wrong side of my front. So I want to make sure that I'm sewing, you know, the wrong side has that understitching, right? So I want to make sure that I'm sewing the right side of the panel to the wrong side of my shorts. I know that's weird, but what's going to happen, and we're going to sew this along this waistband here. What's going to happen after I sew it is that I'm going to flip this over, and then the right side will be on the right side of my shorts. So it's not intuitive, but that is actually what's going to happen. So I'm going to go take mine, shorten my Skort and my panel up, and then I'm going to stitch this seam. Okay, I trimmed it up 3 inches. I'm very happy with the length, and I stitched this front piece panel to the front of my shorts. I'm going to trim this seam, and then since this is going to the front, so I'm going to flip the seam allowance towards the shorts, stitch here because you don't want to see it, so it's going to be on the short side, and then that way when I turn my skirt over, this makes the waistband, and the front waistband is already done, so that will look beautiful. And then I'm just going to baste these sides to the short where I've already basted them closed. I'm going to baste them to the shorts for the same reason. When I go to sew the side seams, I don't want to get any rumples in these, so this will all become one piece, one panel. So I understitched the seam allowance to the inside of my skirt and then pressed this, and I have a really nice front waistband. That's basically essentially what this is. And then just stitched on the edges to hold this front panel to the side seams. Now I'm going to sew the front to the back of the shorts. So you want to make sure that these are not twisted, right? Because you're going to have something that looks like this. And we're only going to sew it on the right side because we're going to put a zipper on this side over here. So we're going to sew it to this right side, which is the long Skort side. Essentially, you want to line up the hem. The hem of the short is going to be even. And on the top edge, you're going to have a little bit of the seam allowance on the piece that is unfinished, because we need to sew the facing to the back piece. So I'm sewing through the front and the back of the shorts, and then additionally that part of the Skort skirt that is attached. All right, so we're going to sew through that, and up at the top we leave space to sew our waistband facing for the back on. All right, so I've basted this right side seam. We're going to go back and stitch that later. Now is a good time to try these on. I ended up cutting mine, shortening them because I tried them on before I put the skirt on. But now you want to tie them on and make sure the circumference is the way you like, because you can still take in the side seams now if you need to. And you want to take them in equally on the left and the right side. And we're not going to do the left side right at the moment because that's the side that the zipper is going to go on. But what we are going to do is deal with the facing. Now, I recut my shorts, so my facing is actually a little small because this is wider now because I cut them shorter. So I do need to make myself a new piece of facing, and essentially I just need to extend it, like almost an inch on each side because it needs to be the same width as the back of my shorts. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. So I attached my facing. I finished the edge with just a step zigzag, sewed it on, and then added a row of understitching so it will roll nicely, and I pressed it. Now I'm going to go back to this side seam that I basted. But what we're going to do, this section, this side right that we basted, now we're going to fold down, get rid of the string here, fold down the facing that we just sewed on and match up these corner side seam edges, which in my mind is probably not the best way. I would have been happier if it overlapped, but it's not going to do that on this one, so we're going to follow the instructions. And you want to make sure that those edges are like flush because this is now going to open up and that's going to be your side seam. So that's super important. And since we basted this all the way down, we're going to actually stitch it now. Then I'm going to go in and use my step zigzag and trim the seam down because there's a lot of bulk there with the skirt and everything. The next step is to put in the invisible zipper on the side, and then we're going to hem them and they're done. These went up really fast. All right, so cute. I put my zipper in, my invisible zipper, and finished this seam. I think I'm not crazy about the construction finishing up here, but I am going to put a little hook and eye in there because it just doesn't go all the way up. Always a challenge to get it right up to the top of the waistband. And then, you know, the waistband's all done for the back and it looks fine. I think what I will do is just put a little tack here in the center back seam to keep it from flopping out because you know how I am about facings. And then I hem them 1.5 inches based on the pattern instructions. I love them. You want to be careful when you're hemming this side over here that you don't hem in the skirt. So you want to start, you know, around the skirt and then come in up under the skirt here because you don't want to stitch that down in the hem. That would look silly. But yeah, I am really happy with them, and I think what I'm going to do, they're a little stretchy because I used the crepe that has a little stretch to them, so they're super comfy, and I did have to take them in a little bit and obviously shorten them. I would use the shorter pattern next time instead of the long one, but I think I'm going to make them again. And I have a vest pattern. As much as I like the jacket on this pattern, this big boyfriend jacket, I have a couple of them, but I do have a vest pattern and I have enough of this crepe left over to make a vest, and I think that would be a sleeveless jacket, if you will. I think that would be super cute and really on trend, and I can wear it all season long, all year long, because this is the color is dark enough that I can wear it in the winter with black tights and maybe a long sleeve shirt, but yet it's light enough that I could wear it, you know, transitionally between spring and fall. So I'm really excited to style it up.